Hello everyone. It's 11:40 and the inquiry is resumed. Is the IT issues fixed, Mr. Richards? Do you know?
Yes, sir. I'm now told that the laptop is back online. The YouTube stream part 2 is now live streaming, and that the link has been sent to the appellants and to
inquiry is resumed. Yes, I have that email. And is the
I've
also checked the YouTube fixed, Mr. Richards?
thing
is working
as well. Yes, sir.
Good to know.
I'm now told. So I think, fingers crossed, we've got the laptop bases we ought to have covered. A YouTube stream part 2 is now live streaming. No, and that the link has been sent to the appellants and to
but I'm very grateful to have that email. And is the IT issues fixed, Mr. Richards? Great. Well, if there's nothing else procedurally, then Mr. Tucker, if you're happy to continue your cross-examination of Mr. Hickson. I can't see Mr. Hickson at the moment, but I assume he's back.
I'm entirely happy, sir. And sir, forgive me, I've taken the executive decision to remove my jacket, if that's acceptable again.
That's fine. I think yeah, that's fine. No problem.
I'm trying to maintain a sense of decorum with the waistcoat. But things get a bit much when you're in an office with no temperature control.
Fine, that's okay.
Mr. Hickson, are you there?
Yeah, I can see Mr. Hickson. Yeah.
Excellent. Right, Mr. Hickson. Let's deal with some of the. Actually, I do have one final point to pick up from your examination chief. Forgive me, I should have asked you this before the break. The Leicestershire round, just so I understand it, that's a 102-mile circular route which passes through a whole variety of different landscapes, doesn't it?
I haven't got the guidebook to hand, but that sounds like, yeah, sounds like a reasonable description. Towns,
villages, countryside, reservoirs even. It doesn't pass through reservoirs, it passes around them, hopefully. So there's a whole variety of different issues. Your point is that presumably because this is a long distance route from which there are some viewpoints, that's a factor to bear in mind when looking at the sensitivity of viewers from that route. You're not saying that there's going to be an adverse effect upon those who are doing the Leicestershire round, are you?
So susceptibility of visual receptors, yeah, one of the indicators is promoted routes and long distance footpaths. I think that's in the Golby and Look LVIA methodology and the guidelines.
Yeah, nothing between us. So it's a point about susceptibility. It's not a point to say that somehow you're degrading the effect of those who are going to walk 102 miles around Leicestershire. That's not what you're arguing, is it?
Well, obviously, I'm assessing the magnitude of change at each viewpoint location. So, I mean, I have to say, yeah, it's some distance away from the site, but yeah, I'm assessing the visual impact on visitors and users of that route.
Okay, right. Let's go into cross-examination proper now then, please. The reason for refusal, you were appointed in December 2021. The matter had been refused on the 17th of September 2021. Core document 5.01 is the decision notice. First obvious question. We have a consultation response from the landscape officer. It's core document 4.25 if you have a burning desire to see it. Why are you giving evidence rather than the landscape officer?
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
You don't know. OK. That's a fair answer. Thank you very much. But certainly you had no part in the case before your appointment in December 2021.
That's correct. I had no involvement in the case before then.
No, again, no criticism. It's perfectly acceptable for somebody to come into the case after refusal, as indeed Mr. Cook does. But before you accepted the brief, presumably you sought to satisfy yourself whether your professional judgment accorded with the views of members.
No, I was an independent. Well, I'm an independent consultant, and I, as far as I was concerned, coming along to provide my own assessments.
Yes, sorry. Before you accepted the brief as to whether you could provide evidence in relation to this matter, you looked at the reason for refusal. First of all, did you?
I was aware of it, but obviously I hadn't carried out an assessment, so I didn't have a particular perspective either way.
OK. And in terms of your evidence today, presumably you are aligning yourself with the harm that's identified in the reason for refusal, or are you saying the reason for refusal is incorrect in some way?
No, I haven't carried out my assessment. Yeah, I think the harm that's identified, yeah, I can, yeah, if you want to say aligned with that.
Aligned, good.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you. So you certainly aren't inviting Mr. Gould to assess factors which go beyond the reason for refusal in weighing the planning balance, which would lead to a decision which is other than the reason for refusal, are you? You're not saying gross effect on residential amenity should have been a reason for refusal in its own right in the light of your assessment, for example, are you?
No, I would put that as part of the LVIA.
Okay. Right, so let's have a look at the reason for refusal, if you will, please. Number of different places. I'm looking at core document 5.01. It's also in the landscape statement of common ground, planning statement of common ground, 2 different planners' evidences. So I don't mind where you look at it. Just tell me when you've got it in front of you.
Yes, got it. Yeah.
Right. So the base upon which the council are inviting dismissal of the appeal is loss of an area of local separation resulting in a significantly narrowed and reduced actual and perceived gap of undeveloped land between the villages. Okay, just pausing there.
Yep.
Is that the correct way of describing it? So reduced and narrowed.
Yeah. Yeah.
You align yourself with that.
I'll set that out in my assessment. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. And it then goes on to say that the resulting harm would also have a significant harmful impact on the character of the countryside and the separate identities of the villages of Sileby and Cossington. See that?
Yep.
So we've got 2 elements looking at it. Firstly, reduction and narrowing of the gap, and then secondly, character impacts on the countryside. Agreed?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. And no other element which would fall within your area of expertise alleged, is there?
No, that's what I focused on. Yeah.
Thank you. No allegation of loss of an area of valued countryside. Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you. No allegation of adverse effect on residential amenity. Do you agree?
Not that's set out in there. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, this is the base of the case that I'm meeting, which is why I'm asking you these questions, Mr. Hickson.
Yeah.
No allegation of an unacceptable effect on visual amenity other than as a component of the gap point, is there?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fine. I mean, those 3 elements are interweaved with LVIA. I think that they are assessed. So.
Yeah, but it's not. We're not dealing with. I'm sorry, we're not dealing with a freewheeling point where it's an LVIA and you can throw in all the harm. This is a formal process in which the council is required by the GDPO to identify the base upon which it invites the inspector to dismiss the appeal. So just focusing upon that, therefore, we agree there is no unacceptable effect on visual amenity other than as a component of the area of local separation alleged by the council. Do you agree?
Well, what I was saying, I've focused on the area of local separation. I've identified, carried out an assessment of views and visual amenity. They're all pretty much focused on that area of local separation anyway. So.
I get that. There's no freestanding point other than the local separation point in terms of visual amenity, is there?
Yeah, I think that's okay. Yeah.
Good, thank you. And the reason for refusal doesn't allege actual coalescence, does it?
It doesn't directly say. It says it's contrary to the policies to prevent the coalescence, but
yeah. And as you've already told me, you agree that the allegation that we're here to address is a reduction and narrowing of the gap, not the loss of the totality of the gap. Agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful. Officers report, which is core document 5.02. Do you have that to hand?
Yep.
This is informed by the landscape officer's consultation response, which I will take you to in a moment, in the light of one of your observations. You've obviously read the officer's report insofar as it deals with landscape, which is really from page 22 onwards.
Yeah.
The area of separation starts on page 21 onwards. So you've read that. Do you align yourself with the approach that's taken by officers, or do you say that you're at variance with them?
Well, if you just give me a minute, I'll just reread it.
Yeah, by all means. It's all right. I'm going to take you through it in more detail, but if you want to remind yourself of the content, that's fine.
Yeah, so the ALS, just read that. Can I read landscape character as well?
Well, let's deal with ALS rather than lots of people looking at a screen watching a bloke reading a document, because that's not particularly a useful use of inquiry time. When was the last time you looked at this, by the way?
A couple of weeks ago.
Right, good. Okay, so you're familiar with it. Yeah. Page 21, under visual and landscape impact, area of local separation. If you look at the third paragraph, it talks about the review of the area of local separation. You see that?
Yeah.
And then the next paragraph talks the application site is considered to have moderate strength in performing the ALS. That's a reference we can see from the footnote to the ARUP report, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which we will turn to in due course. And then the next paragraph is a reference to core document 6.09, which we looked at a few moments ago. Agreed?
Yes. Yeah.
Right, good. No suggestion that the author is deviating from either of those. Let's look at the analysis that's brought forward. So if you turn on to page 22.
Yeah.
We've got a description as to what happens in the first paragraph, and then the second paragraph, which starts as viewed and experienced from Sileby. Do you have that?
Yes, got that, yeah.
Right. This talks about not policy CT4, but talks about policy CS11. CS11.
Yeah.
Just so you're the first one to come over the top in relation to this, so let's just make sure I've got the reference right. Policy CS11 requires a judgment about the effect of development within the gap, doesn't it? It doesn't preclude all development within the gap.
CS11, I've got support and protect the character of the landscape and countryside.
Yeah. And CT4, let me just get this right. Yeah, paragraph 44 of the planning statement of common ground. It is agreed between the parties that policy CS11 allows a judgment to be made about whether new development clearly maintains the separation between the built-up areas.
Okay.
So that's the agreed position between the planners.
Yep.
So the issue between yourself and Mr. Cook, can we agree as to whether CS11 is complied with or breached, depends upon whether the resultant form of development would still clearly maintain the separation between the built-up areas. That's the issue between you, isn't it? Look at the last sentence of that same paragraph that I've just taken you to in the officer's report. That's where it's taken from.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I've taken CS11 as a policy which supported and protected the character of the landscape and countryside.
Well, it goes further than that, but it doesn't matter whether you look at CT4 or CS11. The policy context in this case allows development, gives some concession for development, as the officers rightly say, but requires new development to clearly maintain the separation between the built areas of the settlements. The issue between yourself and Mr. Cook is the effectiveness of the residual area of land in clearly maintaining that separation, isn't it?
Well, it's a combination of the built form and the residual area.
Yeah, I understand that. The issue between yourself and Mr. Cook is whether or not the result of the development would clearly maintain the separation between the built-up areas. That's an issue between the pair of you, which is an important issue for the inspector to determine, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Good. Thank you. Next paragraph. Which is the one that starts, whilst an indicative layout has been provided. It says the scale of the development proposed is considered to have a substantial effect on the purposes of the ALS and results in coalescence of the two settlements. Whilst the built form will be contained, the remainder of the field will be used as POS. ... The transition between the two settlements will be blurred and would not be read as a clear separation. And then if you just go down to the next paragraph, first sentence, it talks about would cause a merging of the settlements. Okay.
Yeah.
See that?
Yeah.
So notwithstanding the reason for refusal, the officer's report suggests that the use of the POS, or that the area of land to the south of the developed area, would blur the gap, and the effect of which will be coalescence and merger. Is that your case?
Yes.
That is your case.
Yeah.
So your case is that there will be coalescence.
Yeah. Yeah. Perception of coalescence.
I didn't ask that. I asked whether there would be coalescence. The officer is saying there would be coalescence and that there would be merger. Is it your case that because my learned friend corrected you when you said that and to perception of coalescence, I've got an officer's report that doesn't allege in the reason for refusal in a delegated report that there would be coalescence, but seems in 2 paragraphs to allege that there is coalescence. But you're not the author of that report. I just want to know whether you say there is going to be actual coalescence. I struggle to know how, but if so, can you tell me, please?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's. Yeah, I think it's the visual component, which is the key thing. So I think perception's helpful.
Right, I still don't understand that as an answer to my question. I've got 2 paragraphs I've taken you to which say there will be merger of settlements.
Yeah.
And I've asked you whether you agree with that. If I take you to page 73 of your Appendix 1, you don't say that in your evidence. What you say is there will be a reduction of the perceived gap. And in the preceding pages, you say there'll be a reduction of the actual gap, page 67.
Yeah.
Now, I thought that meant that there was agreement between you and I that there isn't going to be actual coalescence.
No,
I think that's not what your proof says. So what's your case, Mr. Hickson?
No, I think that the limits of settlement will become closer together, and then the ground in between will be peri-urban, urban fringe, which will perceive as as coalescence.
Right.
So I hope that's what comes across in my proof.
Well, I'm not sure it does, please. It does, but if you're a witness who's addressing a reason for refusal that you've just told me you agree with, i.e. reduction and narrowing of a gap, that's different from eradication of a gap, because this isn't a peri-urban form of development. So I'm sorry, Mr. Hickson, it's binary. Is there going to be coalescence or not coalescence? On your judgment, is the reason for refusal right, or is the officer's report right?
Yeah, the reason for refusal, I think, is right. Yeah.
Right. So there would be, is it fair to say, on your case, a reduction of the gap, both perceived and actual, because of the built form, and then it's important to consider the treatment of the remaining land to ensure that that doesn't result in a reduction of the gap. Is that what we should be focused upon?
Yes, I think that goes alongside it. Yeah.
Right. Good. So let's just deal with that reduction of the proposed gap. The treatment of that gap, i.e., once you get below the 60 metres and between there and the remainder of the appeal site, so the southern part of the appeal site, that's identified as not being built upon. Agreed?
Mm-hmm.
The treatment of that area is still at large, isn't it? That's a matter for reserved matters.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I mean, there's a commitment for drainage infrastructure, I think.
There is. I'm not sure how that would affect coalescence, but in any event, the treatment of how that appears in terms of planting, openness, enclosure, etc., that's all a matter for next time round, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, 1.5 metre embankment around the drainage infrastructure would be considered an engineering operation.
If that proves to be necessary, but how it's treated and how it's screened is a matter for detailed design. My question is whether it's at large, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Well, it's shown on the drainage strategy, so I was going off that.
Yeah. In terms of the detailed treatment of that area of land, that will be determined in due course within by the local authority, won't it? And including that drainage feature. Okay. And whether the hedge is allowed to grow and the depth of development immediately to the south of the developed area and the degree to which there is planting or a restoration of the hedges within the field, those are all matters that are up for grabs at reserved matters, aren't they?
Do we know there was hedges beforehand?
Well, we do if we read the documents, Mr. Hickson. Have you taken the time to do so?
Yeah, I've had a look. Yeah, they mentioned field boundaries. I wasn't clear that they were restoring ancient or historic hedges.
Right. OK. Well, if that's an issue, can you turn to core document 1.05, please? Always happy to inform a witness.
Yeah.
So within core document 1.05, which is the archaeological report, if you start off with, where are we? Forgive me, page 22 of the PDF, which should show, no, not page 22, page 21 of the PDF, which should show the first edition of the OS. Do you have that?
Yep.
And it's not easy to zoom in terms of this PDF, but you can look at it online in any event. The field boundaries which are proposed running northwest to southeast are precisely on the alignment of those internal field boundaries, aren't they?
I didn't think they were actually, but I wasn't sure that those field boundaries were hedges.
Right. Well, let's deal with one point at a time in terms of that. Were you aware of that map when you said you didn't know if they were restoration of original historic field boundaries?
Yeah, well, yeah, I had if I remember right, I did have a conversation with John Golby, Mr. Golby, about it.
Okay, good.
They were on the right alignment.
Right. Whether the inspector can see from the master plan in any event, but those internal field boundaries, the ones that run northwest to southeast broadly, are near as damn it on the same location as the ones that are proposed in the open space, aren't? Surely.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't done an overlay. I mean, yeah, it's not far off.
Good.
But I don't think the report says the hedges, does it?
Well, we don't know because they're not marked. The first edition OS doesn't mark them as hedges, and there isn't a geophysical survey in relation to this. All we can talk about is whether they're field boundaries. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Well,
your question was you didn't know whether there were field boundaries there, and there plainly were, aren't there, Mr. Hickson?
Yeah, your suggestion is you're restoring hedgerows, though.
Mr. Hickson, I'm addressing a point that you asked of me, i.e. you didn't know whether those were historic field boundaries. They plainly are historic field boundaries that are being restored in the open space. The treatment of those field boundaries is at large for the authority, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a detailed matter, yeah.
So, for example, if it were the case that the authority wanted to mark them in some way, but still allow views over from Cossington Road, that would be dead easy by having a management agreement in terms of the height of the hedge and identifying that they'd be planted with short shrubs rather than with tall hedge trees, surely.
Yeah, that could influence the level of enclosure as a result of that planting, yeah.
OK, let's just have a look at the other element in terms of that. The parcel of land within which the development is proposed plainly goes further south than the track which was formed to go under the railway, which we can see on both the first edition and the second edition, can't we?
Yep.
But nonetheless, there was an east-west feature of some description, a track with some sort of marking of the field boundary just to the north of where the southern part of the developed area would be. It's quite clear, isn't it?
Yep.
Good. Thank you very much. So in terms of the structure of the resultant form of development, it's not out of keeping to have that sort of redivision of what is a post Second World War field, is it?
Well, I suppose if they were drainage ditches,
they would have been marked with D. Was there any suggestion that there's any drainage ditches? You've got a road that goes under the railway, and you've got a line south of the road which appears to align to a field boundary. And you can see that what happened, Leicestershire used to be full of sheep until the Second World War. And then as a result of government policy, lots and lots of planting took place and field boundaries took place, were removed. But here it would seem that those field boundaries endured until 1952, if you look at page 24. Do you see that?
Yep.
24 of 44.
Yeah.
So it's only comparatively recently that the field boundaries appear to have been removed and this large open field has been created. It appears to be a modern construct. Is that a fair conclusion to draw from the map regression, Mr. Hickson?
Yeah.
Just whilst we're on that.
The hedges, but yeah, go on.
Well, as I said, the council is entirely at liberty to say, I don't want hedges there. I would rather have something else to mark those field boundaries, if that's thought to be important, as we've already agreed. Just whilst we're on that, if you look at the 1952 OS plan of Sileby, we can see between Cossington Road and the railway, very sporadic development. Do you see that?
Yep.
By the time we get to figure 12, which is the most recent Google Earth, we can see there's been a filling in of that gap by modern late 20th century development. Do you see that?
Yep.
And there's also been an infilling of the plots on the west side of Cossington Road by late 20th century development.
Yeah.
So let's just think about the point of the separation between Sileby and Cossington. The current point of entry that you've identified on the east side of Cossington Road is entirely a modern construct, isn't it? As a consequence of the fact that the developers at some point in the late 20th century stopped developing at Chalford Drive rather than continuing extra 60 metres further to the south. There's no magic in that line, is there?
No, I suppose it follows, did you say it follows a field boundary where you've got sort of orchard or some sort of symbol just north of the appeal site?
But there's no particular topographical or geographical feature which leaps off the plan that says thus far and no further. We're not going over the other side of a ridge line or anything of that nature. We're not crossing a stream or anything like that. There's nothing particularly magical about the boundary stopping there, is there?
It seems to relate to the orchard symbol or whatever those tree lines, the field boundaries are. Topography wise, no.
And there would be no magic in it going a little further to the south in terms of still maintaining some sense of separation, subject to your point about the treatment of the open space. Do you agree?
Well, I think you'll reduce that length of the ribbon development and the open expanse. So yeah, I think it will reduce it. I guess there was a reason why they stopped at that point. I don't know what that is. Just to go back to the track, the alignment of the track, the southwest northeast. I mean, that isn't the boundary of the built form, is it?
That's what I've just said to you. That's the built form goes further to the south of that, and you agreed.
Yeah. So yes, we are agreed with that. So we're introducing a new line which doesn't reflect those historic field boundaries.
So if it did go to the north of that, that would be acceptable, would it?
What followed the track?
Yeah,
line?
if it was north of the track, would that be acceptable in your view?
No, because it would still go up the highest part of the site, so it would be quite visible.
I see.
I was just trying to get a feel for the historic, how you were replicating the historic field boundaries.
Yeah, well, we've discussed that. Page 23 of the officer's report next, please. You'll see the reason why I just asked you that question. Do you have the paragraph directly above landscape character impact?
Sorry, what was the core document reference again?
The officer's report is 5.02.
Yeah.
Just before I took you on a little tour down to the archaeological report to demonstrate where the field boundaries were. So it's 5.02.
Yeah, got that.
There's a paragraph that says it is therefore concluded. You see that?
Yes.
And contrary to CS11, etc., the quantum of the development proposed clearly does not maintain the separation between the built-up areas and the settlement and causes harm to the separate identity of the settlements and landscape, and that's harm that's considered to be significant and demonstrable. So the quantum of development proposed is clearly not maintaining the separation, and you in your proof say this site has no capacity for 170 dwellings. You're very clear in terms of how you approach it. Is it your case that no development can properly come forward within this area of local separation without giving rise to unacceptable harm?
So I haven't really considered that. I've really just focused on the proposed development.
Well, one of the unfortunate things of cross-examination is it looks to try and identify where the differences of professional judgment are and whether you're taking the extremist view of not a single bungalow in this particular, nothing south of Chalfont Drive, otherwise you've wrecked it and the two settlements are merged, or whether you're saying, no, it's the degree and it's the extent of development that's the problem here, and that a smaller development could conceivably still come forward whilst maintaining the gap. And I don't know what your answer to that question is.
So I would refer to the landscape and visual evidence that we have, in particular, the visualizations and photography from viewpoint 6 and viewpoint 7 with my micro sighting. So I consider them to be important views within the context of the local area. And there is a clear sight line from that public right of way diagonally across the site up to the dwellings on the high point on the northern corner near the railway line. So if we accept, and I propose that appeal site, the rising field gives that sense of depth and maintains that separation between Sileby and Costington. If we say that's important, which I say it is, then you can't do anything within that sight line, that view cone. To the right of that view cone, the land slopes down to the watercourse. that might have issues for development. To the left of that view cone, you've got the very corner adjacent to Chalfont Drive.
So let's think about that then. So in your assessment, there would conceivably be some scope for small scale development further south of Chalfont Drive, but it shouldn't progress all the way up within that view corridor, going up to the top of the ridge line. Is that your view?
That's yes, it's a very important view, and that view cone is a very important view in my opinion. I think that you would then need to consider other viewpoints. That might be the road corridor and the perception of travelling along the road. It might be travelling on the train, or it might be some of the other viewpoints.
No,
so
this
suggest an exercise that reviews all the other viewpoints, but as you've suggested, that corner is probably the area to have a look at.
Okay, so the inspector should note, therefore, the difference between the two of us is Mr. Cook thinks that the appeal scheme is fine. You think that the appeal scheme is unacceptable, but you recognise that on the northwest corner of the site that there could be some scope for development, even if it brings the entry point into Sileby on your case a little further south. That's the issue between us.
I think it's extremely restricted. And you would need to test it further.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you put it in that way. So that's an issue of degree between us rather than principle. That's helpful. I won't have to characterise you as extremist when it comes to closing submissions. So it's degree rather than principle. Can you take up core document 4.25, please? Which I wasn't going to take you to, but I think I should now in the light of that.
Yeah.
So this is the officer's report. There were two landscape officers' reports. Sorry, consultation responses, one of which is core document 4.24, the other is 4.25. At 4.25, you get both in one, because what the officer's done is the black text is the original consultation response, and the pinky red text is the updated response. So she's weaved it in there. Okay.
Yep.
So when we've got discussions, and the inspector will read the totality of that, you can see the second paragraph. The proposal would have a substantial effect on the purpose of the ALSD and result in settlement coalescence. And that's the point we talked about before. Notwithstanding the submitted illustrative plan and the compartmentalised public open space to the south, the site is the last significant area of open rural landscape between the two settlements and is already stated characterised by an open, expansive arable field. Just pausing there. She's factually wrong about that, isn't she? The land to the west of Cossington's undeveloped. The ALS to the west of Cossington is also undeveloped and part of the open rural landscape, isn't it?
Sorry, which one? The site is the last significant area?
No, there are two. The ALS extends to the west of Cossington Road.
Yeah.
This is not, and that area is undeveloped. So it's wrong to say this is the last area of undeveloped land, surely. She's factually wrong, isn't she?
Sorry, I'm not sure I was reading it right. The last, sorry, which sentence was that?
The site is the last significant area of open rural landscape between the two settlements and is, as already stated, characterised by an open, expansive arable field.
Yeah, well, I think the point she's getting at is this idea of openness, which is an aesthetic.
Yeah, what's the answer to my question, Mr. Higson?
Well, the answer is no. I don't think she's factually wrong, because I think west of Cossington Road, it's more enclosed through hedges and trees, and that is an aesthetic interpretation of openness.
I see. Goes on. Visual impact. No direct views of the site or of Sileby from the edge of Cossington at the Cossington Road sign position. Is she right about that?
Yes, because Costington's on. Yeah, sorry, that road sign is on just near the corner. Yeah, no,
yeah. Noting that she obviously places some emphasis upon that as a point of departure, presumably. Here, the spatial quality is confined and enclosed with little sense of another settlement beyond. Is she right about that?
Yeah. Yeah.
The land to the east of the road is used as a timber yard and a nursery garden, conveying a peri-urban characteristic. Just pausing there. Part of that peri-urban characteristic land is within the AOLS, isn't it?
Yeah.
The nursery. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's nothing inimical in peri-urban land being part of an AOLS, is there?
No, there's a few examples of that around. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't need to take you to them then. Views of Sileby and the western edge of the site only become apparent as one approached. I think that should be approaches the entry sign for Sileby at the boundary between the nursery and Brook Farm.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, as you travel along the road, yeah.
Yeah. So her view, now also noted as your view, is that there is, between the two road signs, leaving Costington and arriving at Sileby, no visibility of the site. It follows there is no effect of the site, is there? Between those two parts.
Yep.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful. And then in terms of the views from the public rights of way, which I know you stressed viewpoint number 6. Let's see what the landscape officer says. Glimpse views of the site can be seen as one walks the PROs through the fields on the west of the road towards the site. So just pausing there, she characterised those as not important view cones, but as glimpse views. Is she wrong?
Well, I think you can be right. We can be both right on that, can't we? Glimpsed important views.
Well, she doesn't say important views. You say they're important views. You talk about a view
That's...
cone. You talk about the northern bit of the site. We have none of that from her, do we?
She doesn't analyse the view cone, no. Although, yeah, I think she's probably been posed a different question. You asked me if there was any capacity within the site for development, and I provided helpfully, although it's not within the scope of my work, to suggest how a designer might approach that question.
Well, you've given me your answers in relation to the site having some capacity for development. That's helpful. Thank you. Next, if you can turn to residential amenity in the officer's report, please. You should have the title residential amenity.
What page is that? Sorry.
Page 25, I've got it.
Yeah.
And you'll see it's discussed in the first paragraph, and the second paragraph talks about it's acknowledged the outlook from surrounding properties will change should the open space be built upon. There is no right to a view, however, and there are policies in place to prevent the loss of residential amenity and safeguards from overlooking and loss of privacy.
Yep.
Residential amenity is not considered to be a concern by the officer reporting because it's a matter for the next stage. Do you agree?
Yep.
So insofar as you draw attention to the relationship of the existing houses, certainly the officer consider that's a matter that can be properly resolved at reserved matter stage.
Yep. Yes.
And you align yourself with that?
Yep.
Right, good. Planting and mitigation, by which I'm dealing with both mitigation of views of the developed area of the site and also planting within the open space. So two different concepts. Planting to assist with the sense of separation, and secondly, planting as mitigation of development.
Yeah.
Right. Firstly, current southern part of Chalfont Drive. We have different approaches that are taken to the rear of those properties, but there's certainly no coherent landscaping to mitigate the effects and its relationship to the countryside, is there?
There's a coherent straight edge which follows an historic hill boundary. And
what's the answer to my question, Mr. Higson? There's no coherent attempt in terms of landscaping that southern edge because no doubt it was built in the 70s at the time when that wasn't done, and its relationship with the countryside to the south. Do you agree?
The individual private garden boundaries, and as you'd expect, treated differently.
Mr. Higson, this cross-examination is going to take a long time if you don't answer direct questions directly. I suspect everybody else on this call knows that when I'm talking about a coherent landscape strategy in relation to the south side of that site, I'm not talking about what individual householders are doing. So I'm going to ask for a third time, and if you choose not to answer, I'm going to make submissions that you're a witness that chooses not to answer a direct question. So, Mr. Higson, can we agree that there is no coherent, coordinated approach to landscaping on the south side of the properties on Chalfont Drive?
Yes, beg your pardon, I agree with that.
Thank you, that's helpful. Whatever else may be said for the proposed development, it affords the opportunity for a coherent approach to landscaping to be taken in relation to the southern edge of the proposed building line. Do you agree?
Yeah, there's a coordinated scheme, so yes.
And it is the sort of thing that you and other landscape architects regularly do to advise how you soften the edges of settlements to accommodate development. So it's quite familiar territory to try and achieve that, isn't it?
Yep.
Thank you. So there's no reason here why that couldn't be achieved in a satisfactory manner, is there?
It's about location. So if I give you a short answer, no, it can't be satisfactorily done here.
Okay, why?
Because of the narrow gap between the two settlements. I think if you were putting this scheme on a settlement that was in the middle of countryside all around, and the nearest village was 2 or 3 kilometres away or further, it would be a great scheme. So it's about context.
All right, that's interesting. But for the gap, then this scheme would be acceptable in landscape terms, would it?
Yeah, I think if we were in a different context with a much more open fields, yeah.
Okay, and forgive me, I was trying to separate out the two roles of planting, so I was dealing solely with the issue of the development itself. So in terms of mitigating the development effects, you're happy with that can be achieved satisfactorily. Your point is that the effect on the gap can't be mitigated satisfactorily, which is the second point. Is that fair?
I think there's an adverse effect in loss of countryside, but that can be reduced in visual terms through planting.
Okay, and your concern therefore is the effect on the gap, not about the mitigation of views of the built form. Is that fair?
Sorry, say that again.
Your issue is in terms of acceptability of the mitigation. Your concern is the effect on the gap. Your concern isn't about the ability to mitigate views of the built development.
No, well, yeah, they're still intertwined, aren't they? But yes, it's the gap. But I don't think, because the buildings are going up that highest ground, we've seen in the visualizations, you've still got rooftops in undeveloped skyline. So the planting isn't effective at those locations.
Right, look at your paragraph 4.2.41 dealing with the issue of the effect on the gap. 4.2.41, the effect of planting upon the gap. You say consequences, the proposal, including development and open space, would have a harmful effect on openness. Moreover, given the scale of the development, the loss of spatial openness cannot be fully mitigated through siting, landscape and design. The proposal would cause a permanent loss of an important and prominent part of the AOLS. So you're dealing with the scale of the development means that you can't fully mitigate through those factors. Okay?
Yep.
That's what you're telling us. The inference I get from that is that there is, notwithstanding the scale of the development, there is partial mitigation that's been proposed that can be successful. Is that the correct inference I draw from your use of the term fully to qualify mitigated? It's the only logical inference from the words you're using.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just reading it again.
Can I just check that paragraph number again, please?
Yes, by all means, sir. Paragraph 5.2.41, page 75. My favourite page of Mr. Higson's proof.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think it's the combination of the built edge and the residual width of the corridor of the open space.
Yeah. But when a witness says that something can't be fully mitigated, that's telling me it can be partly mitigated. Am I correct in reading that? Because otherwise the words have no meaning, to be blunt.
Yeah, sorry, yes.
Right,
yeah,
okay.
I suppose I'm thinking, can it be fully mitigated? Yeah, no, it can't.
Well, let's assume that the inspector says, notwithstanding all of Mr. Higson's concerns, that the planning balance is such, the benefits are such, the need for housing is such, that permission should be granted.
Yeah.
And the council come knocking on your door in relation to the area of open space to the south of the built form and say, right, okay, we know you say it can't be fully mitigated, but how can it be partly mitigated? And knowing that this is an issue at large, what could or should the council be advising the applicant at that stage for reserved matters?
Yeah, no, sorry. I think what I was thinking is, so obviously we've got an access to the development which removes the section of hedgerow. So we can mitigate that by planting some new hedgerow. So that could be partial mitigation.
Oh, I see. So
landscape sense.
So when you're talking about the view from Cossington Road, you could plant hedgerow behind that view so that you've not got that direct view across the land. Is that your sort of point?
No, not a visual point. It's a landscape point in terms of a landscape element of a section of a gap of hedge is gone. Put a gap strip somewhere else on the side.
Oh, I see.
That would be classified as landscape mitigation.
Okay. So there are steps that can be taken in terms of mitigation. That's your position, is it, Mr. Higson?
Again, obviously, I'm assessing the proposals brought forward, but as a designer, if you were thinking about what could be done, yeah, I mean, you can obviously come up with suggestions.
Well, I'm not asking you to design it, self-evidently.
Well, that's what I'm.
All I'm asking is whether or not there are broad principles that could be brought forward, which, notwithstanding your primary cases that permission should be withheld, notwithstanding that, if the appeal is allowed, what sort of things should the authority be thinking about? For example, let me just give you an example. We talked before about the restoration of the historic field boundaries.
Yeah.
That you could very easily maintain views from Cossington Road over a hedge by maintaining that hedge, and you could maintain views over those historic field boundaries by having only low-level planting. Is that the sort of thing you had in mind?
No, because the key effect is the loss of a single arable field which is open and simple. So how do we mitigate that? By adding new elements, aesthetic or perceptual characteristics. So that's why I've said I just don't think we can fully mitigate it because of the scale of the development.
And I've given you that, and that's why I'm asking you in an appeal allowed world, how does the authority partially mitigate it? I know what our case is. Our case is your starting point's wrong, because starting as a single field, yes, that's how it is now, but it wasn't that for 200 years at least that we can look at. It was a number of fields. And bringing planting into this location, we say, is consistent with the landscape character area. I know you say it's not. But in terms of mitigation, I just want to know what your case is so the inspector can see the battle lines.
Yeah, well, and I'm really struggling with that because, you know, if we do a parkland character, that's individual scattered trees. That's not an open field. It's not simple. If we do a heathland or reed bed, you know, that's a slightly different, has constraints and difficulties. And again, it's a different colour, different texture. It's the open arable field. So whichever way we go with it, it's a challenge, and it's a challenge because of how far south the development comes and the residual width.
But can we agree that the challenge for the designer in that instance would be, firstly, to mitigate the effects of the development, i.e. the southern boundary of the proposed developed area, and secondly, to propose planting in a way which maintained the perception of separation, albeit it was reduced perception. Those are the two elements, aren't they?
Well, I can see how a design and access statement would say, let's try and do that. I think the difficulty we've got is the play area and the basin and the fencing and the signage and the gravel bound footpath that sweeps through it. And so what we have is an urban park. It might have some habitat and grassland, but there's just lots going on in there.
But you've just told me a peri-urban area of land can still fulfil a gap function. You told me that when we looked at the land at Cossington.
And there's examples.
So why can't it do that in Sileby?
Well, there are examples where such treatments have been taken out of an area of separation.
Yeah, but you've just told me within this area of separation that there is peri-urban activity. So why can't it be the case in south of Sileby? Logic.
Yeah, I think it's width and extent. I think it comes to width and extent. I think once you get to a point where it's so narrow, at the moment we get away with the peri-urban characteristics because it's got an open arable field next to it. That's why we get away with it. If you fill that in with more peri-urban expanse, it won't work.
So let's just think about this. Let's assume that the farmer decided to plant trees on the southern part of the field in an appeal dismiss world. Does that mean that you're destroying the gap function? Government's just announced a woodland planting scheme for farmers through DEFRA. So if they do that, if this farmer decides to go along that line, are you saying, for goodness sakes, that's going to trash the gap? That just seems nonsense, Mr. Hickson, surely.
It's going to create enclosure, visual enclosure.
So you're saying woodland planting of itself is harmful and would destroy the gap in this location?
I think in visual terms, and I recognise that sometimes landscape considerations conflict with ecological considerations, but in character terms, if you've got an expanse of an open arable field, start to fill it with trees or whatever, then we will blur the distinction between those obvious elements of settlement edge.
And can we agree that the area of local separation is not a landscape tool, it's primarily a planning tool?
Yeah, no, I'm happy with that. I think I put that in my proof. It's clearly evaluated with landscape and visual tools and techniques, but yeah.
So the quality of the landscape isn't the primary objective, it's the planning issue of maintaining separation between settlements that's important. Agree?
Yeah, and yes, and width and topography and pattern and scale, that's all set out in the documents.
Let me see if I can make that good. Do you have core document 6.07, which should be the ARAP report?
Yeah. Yeah, got that.
Make sure I've got the right one, forgive me. Yes, sorry, it's 6.06. So I'll tell you what's thrown me. It is 6.07 on the core document list, but when you open it, it opens as 6.06.
Right.
In any event, it's the 2016 report I wanted.
The 607.
Yeah. Which when you open it, opens and calls itself 606.
Okay.
So 608 was the one that was the update in 2019.
Okay.
Just to be clear, we're looking at 606 or 607.
We're looking at 607 on the core document list. We're looking at 606 as the title of the document. It's the 2016 document, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the hyperlink is a 606, isn't it?
Yes, that's what completely threw me. Forgive me. The 2019 one, which I'm not asking you to turn up, was essentially just have a quick look at some of the ALSs and etc. So it's the 2016 one that provides the most detailed assessment. Yeah, good. Right, and if you look at, I'm going to give you the PDF numbers of pages rather than the hard copy numbers of pages. And it's page 10 of the PDF, which should have section 3.3.
Yeah.
Now this looked at green wedges, urban fringe infrastructure enhancements. Sorry, urban fringe infrastructure enhancement zones, and also areas of local separation. So it looked at all those areas, didn't it?
Yeah.
But in 3.3, it picks up the appeal decision at Mount Sorrel. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And we can see that, well, we know it's in the rebuttal proof of Mr. Cook, that was an appeal which was allowed, notwithstanding that there was a significant narrowing of the area of local separation. Mm-hmm. You see that?
Yep.
And Arup's report in the paragraph underneath the quote, whilst the inspector agreed that due weight should be afforded to the AOLS, he came to the view the application did not significantly undermine the integrity of the wider AOLS or harm its character or appearance, noting the strategic nature of the policy to prevent settlements merging one with another. This judgment is being given particular consideration in the development of the assessment methodology. It's essentially the AOLSs were established in 2004. This is resetting or recalibrating the judgments in the light of that appeal. Do you agree?
Yes, that's how I understood it when I read it. Yeah.
Good. Page 15 next.
Okay.
You can see the overall approach at the bottom of that page, but then underneath the figure 4, do you see both green wedges and ALS are primarily planning designations with a common function to maintain separation?
Yes.
And that's a point that comes out throughout this document. This isn't landscape character protection. This is a planning policy.
Yeah, the way they're judged in the terms of their purpose uses landscape and visual tools and techniques.
Yeah, it does. But if you notice the next page, there's a paragraph that says the landscape appraisal considered. Do you see that?
Yeah.
But then it actually says we didn't do a full LVIA to come to the conclusions that we reached in that paragraph. You see that?
That's all right.
Yeah. Yeah. Page 25 next, please.
Yeah.
4.3.2. Underscoring that this is can be considered more purely as planning designations whose functions is to maintain the separation, etc. Traditionally being applied to areas at the fringe of the settlement, which might not be considered open countryside, but then maintain a degree of openness which separate unique settlements. Now that's important to note, isn't it, when we discuss the use of the land to the immediate south of the appeal proposals. So it doesn't have to be open countryside to maintain an AOLS function, does it?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you. So it's not enough, is it, to say there's going to be a change of that from open countryside to POS. You've got to ask yourself the next question as to whether or not the treatment of that area would of itself not give rise to a gap function. That's the second question. It's not to say it's a change from an open field. You've got to go further, haven't you?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Is that something you've taken account in your evidence? Because I'm not saying any reference at all to it.
Yeah, but I think it's about width.
No, hold on. That was a direct question too, Mr. Higson. Is that something you have taken account of in your evidence?
Yeah.
You have. Good. Where? That it doesn't have to maintain its open countryside. Where's that?
Uh, 5.2.26.
5.2.26.
Functionality of the ALSD is at risk of being compromised by future development by virtue of its already narrow width interlocking pattern of enclosure with several landscape elements and features and resulting pinch point associated with the corner of number 188 West of Cossington Road.
That's
entrance.
That's a completely different point. My point was, in principle, ALS can include areas of, let's say, public open space, equine paddocks, nurseries, things that aren't just open countryside. That's an important element when looking at AOLS and looking at the southern part of the appeal site, which changes from open countryside to an area of publicly accessible land. Where do you recognise the proposition in 4.3.2, which tells us that in terms?
Because I've looked at the moderate purpose score and then looked at the audit in terms of what the character is and the landscape and other features and proximity to neighbouring settlements and visual assessment, nature and extent of urban edges, recreational opportunities. That these are all the judgments that the authors make in respect to whether the AOLS is meeting its purpose.
Yeah, well, that wasn't my question, but the inspector will no doubt have picked up the point. Let's turn to page 27 of this document now, please, which is under the title Approach to Purpose, and we've got the criteria which are then used, which has, does the area physically separate settlements? And then the criterion is prevents development that would result in merging or significant erosion of the gap. And then we've got strengths that are then given. Strong is it's an area which provides an essential gap between two or more settlements, restricting development, which as a result, ... would lead to the merging of the settlements. Area is subject to particular development pressures. And then moderate provides a gap, so not an essential gap, provides a gap between two or more settlements, restricting further development. So there's a difference between strong and moderate, which may lead to the merging of these settlements. See the distinction between the two?
Yeah.
So in a strong area, it's essentially saying there's a real problem here. Development's going to cause merging. In the moderate areas, it's saying, well, it's much more of a nuanced approach. This isn't the essential gap. There may be a gap which is less than that, and there may be a merging. You've got to judge it on its merits. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
Yeah.
Thank you. And then if you look at page 44 of this document, yeah, page 44.
Yeah.
It's not 44, sorry. 42 is where you've got the conclusions. But if you look at 43, last paragraph of 5.1.2 says there's a small number that are strong, the rest of them are moderate in terms of that issue.
Oh, sorry, I've lost that. I've on 42, did you say?
Yeah, 4.43, the next page, under the title Areas of Local Separation. First paragraph, in general, most AOLS continue to perform the purpose. Then says, whilst the majority of ALS meet this purpose moderately, a small number are identified as performing strongly in relation to the small scale of the gaps between the settlements. Yeah?
Yeah, so I'd gone to page 42 for some reason. Did you say
5.1.2, it's entirely my fault, I'm sure. 5.1.2, page 43, paragraph that starts in general.
In general, yeah, got it. Sorry.
Last sentence of that says, whilst the majority of AOLS meet the purpose moderately, a small number meet it strongly. See that? And then we can see what those are on the next few pages. And I think it's 46 is ALSD. Do you have that?
ALSD, yeah.
And what's the concern that's in relation to ALSD? Well, firstly, the purpose score is given as moderate. So we know we're not in the strong, we're in the moderate category. And it provides the gap between Sileby and Costington, preventing further ribbon development along Cossington Road and ensuring the integrity of the gap is maintained. So the particular feature which is of concern to the authors of this is ribbon development along Cossington Road.
Yeah.
That's not what this development will result in, is it?
Well, I suppose what they're recognising is I suppose ribbon development being, you can have ribbon development either side of a road corridor. So yeah, no, I'd say it's ribbon development. Yeah.
No, ribbon development is single plot depth development along a road length. That's not what we're proposing. This is an expansion of the previous expansion of Costington to the Sileby to the north. Right. This is the antithesis of ribbon development. Surely.
Yeah, maybe they may moderate in relation to ribbon development only.
Well, it's interesting when you look at some of the other descriptors of moderate, because look at the next one down. So for area E, prevents ribbon development on Barrow Road between Sileby and Barrow on Soar, which would lead to perceptual merging of two settlements. So if you look at ALSD again, noting that the concern for the next one down was perceptual merging of settlements, that's not a factor that's assessed by Arup as being of concern in this instance. You see that?
Sorry, say that again.
If you contrast this, and of course the inspector should read all of the ALS descriptors to see the differences, contrast it with others, and I draw particular attention to the one that's directly below.
Yeah.
So for ALSE, prevents ribbon development on Barrow Road between Sileby and Barrow upon Soar, which would lead to perceptual merging of two settlements. Look at ALSD, no such allegation in relation to our area of AOLS, is there?
There isn't in that text in the table, no.
No. So no allegation of an effect on merger, and the primary concern relates to a form of development which isn't what's being proposed in this instance. Is that a fair conclusion to come to?
Yeah, I mean, they won't have done visualizations and modelling, will they? If they've, you know, in terms of how a development might appear. But no, I'll take your point.
Yeah, thank you. But what they do, we can see, if you turn to page 71 of this document, page 71, they recommended an extension of the boundary, didn't they?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So if you look at ALSD suggests there should be an extension of the boundary further to the west of the ALS. You see that?
Yep.
And it does so that you've got a proper definition of the boundary on the western side. That would encompass more open, undeveloped land, wouldn't it? Had that been followed through.
Yeah, I think that's included in the emerging local plan.
Yeah, and that's the area through which your viewpoint 6 is, or forgive me, Mr. Golby's viewpoint 6 runs, isn't it?
6 and 7, yeah.
Yeah. So to be clear, in relation to the functionality of this area of separation, we know from other work undertaken by LUC that they think the land to the south, which is ultimately resolved to be granted consent, has some function in terms of area separation. And we know that Arup think that land to the west has some function in terms of an area of separation. So in terms of the importance of the ALS as designated back in 2004, the inspector needs to view it in the context that there are other areas of land beyond that which have some function in the mind of the council's consultants. Is that fair?
The area to the west. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've already looked at what LUC had to say about the area of the land to the south.
No, well, that was a different report, wasn't it? That wasn't assessing.
Yeah, that's what I've just said to you. The land to the south, a different set of consultants said land outside of the ALS still fulfilled the separation function. These consultants are saying land to the west of the ALS fulfills a separation function. It's not just the ALS that has a separation function, it would seem, on the council's evidence. Is that fair?
Yeah, I forgot what the LUC said exactly on that land to the south. That's the Humble Lane site.
That's the Humble Lane site, absolutely. That's the one where it had the big red blob of medium to high when it came to landscape character in terms of separation of settlements, even though it was outside of the area of local separation. That's the report.
Yeah.
And yet the council considered that it had a nil effect in terms of separation. And that was the discussion we had at the very outset. The point's a simple one. I mean, really is a simple one, which is that when you're looking at what the characteristics of these two settlements are post the allowing of this appeal, if it is allowed, we shouldn't just focus upon the degree to which the ALSD designated area is diminished. We should look at the extent to which there is actually a diminution in the separation of the real world gap between the settlements. Do you agree?
Yeah, well, looking at this plan now and the purple extended area, it's between the back gardens, isn't it, to the west of Sileby and Costington. So yeah, it seems like an odd suggestion, really, given that the critical bit is either the land, the current green area.
What's also interesting is looking at the area of ALS-D, which is overlaid on the on what was described as being peri-urban activities. We can see that quite clearly, can't we, on that aerial photograph?
Yeah.
And you can go through other ALSs, can't you? And you can see extensive trees within the ALSs. There's nothing inimical about having trees in ALSs, is there?
Let's have a look.
A, B, F.
What about G? Should we have a quick look at G?
It's entirely up to you. I've given you A, B, and F, for example.
Yeah, well, let's do A, B, and F, and then we'll do G, shall we?
It's entirely up to you.
So you're suggesting at A.
Lots of trees in there. This is testing your proposition about the functionality of a gap being diminished by the fact that you would be seeing trees in the area.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at lots of trees in A, aren't I? Page 68 of this document.
Yeah.
Anything in this document saying that the gap is diminished by the fact there are trees there?
Not that I can read, that jumps out now. So established vegetation.
Got lots of trees in B as well, including the extension to B. See that?
Hmm. Yeah, belt to mature deciduous tree cover currently defines field extents. Yeah.
Yeah. You've even got trees in D, haven't you, along the Cossington Road near the brook?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to take you through all of them, but you're welcome to go to G. My question was, extensive tree planting within ALSs is not inimical to their function, is it?
Well, it's going to depend on context, size and scale and the other factors. But if we have a look at G and alternative defensible boundaries column, you'll see a reference that the boundary should be realigned to take account of the park and ride facility located along the western edge of the AOLS. It's suggested that the amended boundary follows the outer extent of hard surfacing. Additionally, it is not judged that the area of playing fields will function as part of the AOLS, and the boundary should be realigned with topographical features and or planted features to ensure a logical boundary. Now, if we... Pardon?
Sorry, I hadn't realised you'd finished.
So the playing fields don't function on this particular site. And the park and ride with a drainage basin and a strip of landscape planting to mitigate that park and ride are also taking out of the ALS. And if we look at the emerging local plan, that AOLS has been reduced in accordance with this recommended report from 2016. So it does seem to me ambiguous, not certain, that we definitely know what will happen to this AOLS in the future. Will Derry's nurseries and that land behind Brook Farm still be considered acceptable in the future with the addition of the developments? I'm not 100% sure about that.
Okay, well let's deal with your G point in the context that I asked you. I've got quite a lot of trees in G as well, haven't I?
Yeah.
Thank you. And in terms of the actual function that the playing fields and or the park and ride fulfill in that location and the justification for removing them, is there any further explanation of it's not judged that it will function as part of the AOLS?
Well, I think we're both just clutching at sentences in a report. We need to go out and have a look, don't we? I mean, you know, the authors haven't just looked at planting and gone, yeah, that planting's all right.
No,
I'm about a whole range of criteria.
No, forgive me. I'm not clutching at straws. I'm pointing out to you that peri-urban features are within ALSs and extensive tree planting is within ALSs. Notwithstanding your rather daft proposition about 20 minutes ago that if the farmer planted trees within this particular parcel of ALS, that there would be some harm to the gap function in this area, which the inspector will judge accordingly.
And the point I make is peri-urban features have been removed from AOLS as well as part of the emerging local plan.
Understood. And I think the final point from this document is 89, page 89. Which explains the proposed extension of Area D, which we just looked at, where it says the designation retained and extended to strengthen boundaries to the southwest. This change would enhance integrity and logic of the designation and ensure the narrow gap between Cosington and Sileby is not compromised. So this is not simply including it to relate to boundaries. It has a particular functional justification, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think it's a coherent landscape unit, the pasture fields and the rising arable land. So I can see the logic in having that as a space.
Thank you.
Mr. Tucker, just sorry to interrupt.
Yes,
just conscious that we're getting up to, we've just gone 1 o'clock. I appreciate you probably still have a number of questions for Mr. Hickson. So I just wondered whether there was a convenient point to break.
I suspect there probably is a convenient point, and it's probably here, sir. I don't have that many more, so it's probably about 20 minutes more, if that helps.
Okay, thank you for that. I think probably best if we break and then come back to hear those questions and finish things off. So okay, thank you. Well, we'll stop there, and we will adjourn until 2 o'clock. Is there any procedural points? Anything before we adjourn? I think IT all seems to be running smoothly. I'm not being made aware of anything on those lines, so that's fine. Okay, well we'll take a break for lunch then, and we'll come back at 2 o'clock.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Hickson.
Hello, everyone. It's 2 o'clock and the inquiry is resumed. Are we happy to carry on with cross-examination? I think nothing to mention before then.
Nothing for our part, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So, yes, Mr. Hickson is able to put his camera back on, and if we're happy to carry on, please continue.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Hello, Mr. Hickson.
I am.
One point I forgot to put to you before lunch, just on this issue of extending the AOLS. Do you have core document 635 to hand?
Yeah, in just a moment.
Which is the emerging Cossington neighbourhood plan?
Yeah, I saw that earlier this week. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, it was mentioned earlier this week, and that's why I think it's probably just fair to draw your attention and really the inquiry's attention to it. It's page 50 within that, 50.
Yeah.
And if you look at figure 17, it's probably self-evident what the neighbourhood plan is trying to do. The local plan area of separation is the dotted notation, if you see that, and the emerging area of local separation within Costington is the sort of orangey area.
Yeah,
you see that? And I think obviously that appears to be transgressing into the northern part of the Humble Road site, if I read that correctly. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. And fundamentally, that's a matter for the planners to tell me what the weight of that is. But it sort of adds to the point that there are other areas beyond the adopted area of local separation which are thought by others to have an AOLS type role, which I think we agree anyway, don't we?
Yeah.
Good. That's helpful. Thank you for that. 2 final topics you'll be pleased to hear, Mr. Hickson. First of which is landscape susceptibility.
Okay.
Could you take up, please, your proof of evidence? I think we can deal with this relatively quickly. Paragraph 3.2.8 of your proof.
Yep.
Where you tell us at 3.2.8 that the appeal site is said to be typical of the Saw Valley LCA.
Yep.
And I was scrawping around for it earlier on. But if you look at 3.2.6, you also tell us on the same page that the site has no ability to accommodate the addition of up to 170 dwellings. That's where that reference is to be found. So it's a site which you say is typical of the Soar Valley LCA. And the reason why that's the case, if you look at 3.25, is because you say that whilst the landscape character area has a medium susceptibility to proposals, that the appeal site itself has a high susceptible to proposed development. Okay?
Yeah.
Which you then seek to make that proposition good within the tables that follow. Is that how I read your proof?
Yeah, well, the tables are written first and then the summaries that precede the tables are written afterwards, but yeah.
Yeah, but so your starting point is it's typical of the LCA, but this particular parcel of land, although the two LCAs that you identify are relevant, have medium overall susceptibility to this type of development, you think this has high susceptibility to this type of development. Let's just see where you see that. At the bottom of page 21, dealing with Trent Valley Washlands NCA, that's the big area. We can see the medium figure appears at the bottom. And at page 22, the Soar Valley LCA, so we're now down into a more fine-grained landscape character area. Again, medium value overall. Yeah?
Yeah.
And to get to your high overall, which we see at page 23, which is the local setting of the appeal site, and then high overall, which is the appeal site at page 24, we go through the different elements, don't we?
Yes.
And just looking at those elements in turn. So the first bit, box rather. So the Soar Valley LCA has moderate strength in terms of its character, whereas both the local setting and the site itself, you say, are good. Okay. So I'm then looking to try and understand why it is there's a distinction between the generality of land within the LCA and the appeal site in its setting. And if I look at the two explanations, just dealing with table SH3, why is this good rather than the generality is moderate? Well, I've got local setting of the appeal site is a recognisable, coherent land character unit within the Soar Valley LCA. Well, it's factual. The appeal site's an open arable site on rising slopes adjacent to lower lying flatter pastures within the wider AOLS, bordered by tree-lined watercourse to the south. And then development of land off Humble Lane will completely change the character of this. So I'm struggling to understand from that how it is that this is different to the generality of matters, other than it's within the AOLS. Is that it?
No, it's not. It's about character. So as I say in 3.25 paragraph, obviously I summarise what's in the table and identify that the Trent Valley Washlands and the Soar Valley have a generally medium susceptibility to the proposals, but it's acknowledged that variation will occur at more local scales.
Yeah, get that.
And so that it follows on that I then look at the site and the local setting as well.
Yeah, but I'm looking at the explanation as to why I've got the generality's moderate strength. For the setting, it's good strength, and for the site, it's good strength. And I was looking for an explanation for the setting, first of all. So why is this better than the generality of the LCA? And I'm struggling to see anything.
The generality of the LCA is recognised as one of the most urbanised parts of the borough, the Soar Valley, and so you have settlements, infrastructure, commercial development as well. And I think I say that in the table. And within that, there are better strength character of pasture fields and rising valley size and arable. Well, that's exactly what we have in the appeal site in the local setting. So what I'm picking up on is the appeal site isn't a brownfield site in the middle of an industrial town or, spreading over an existing settlement. It's in the good strength part of the Soar Valley, not the detracting or other parts.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm not sure it says that, but I understand your reasoning. So you're saying the LCA's got good and bad in it. This is in the good bits. Is that essentially it?
Yes. Yeah.
What's the reference in the last paragraph to the Humble Lane development then, which you say will completely change the character of the site?
Well, because that means, well, it's capturing cumulative change, and that will go from an arable field to development. So I suppose I'm trying to capture the cumulative change really in that things change over time. There's a commitment.
So this is
to grant.
So this is the setting. So that includes development on Humble Lane. So are you saying that knocks it down a notch then?
Well, that part, the local setting, obviously, I'll provide a plan, but that's obviously quite extensive as we've discussed. So I suppose I'm trying to capture the fact that there is development on that edge. So that part of the local setting, that probably will notch it down.
Okay.
That part of it, yeah.
Okay, that. I understand that. Next one, the generality of the LCA is low to moderate scenic quality. And then you assess the local setting as being good scenic quality.
Yeah.
And you also note the site has good scenic quality.
Yeah.
Is this the same point, really? Because all it's describing is it's a field adjacent to settlements.
Well, scenic quality is about long distance views. So to Charnwood Forest, across the flatter floodplain. Obviously, in terms of the local setting, it's picking up on the visual connection with the Church of All Saints and the fields around there.
Right. But it's no more than a field in the context of other fields in terms of its context. Is it no more than that? That's why it's good rather than low to moderate.
Well, it's good because it's open farmland on rising land with expansive views towards Charnwood Forest, which you don't get everywhere from all parts of Soar Valley. You know, there's a lot of enclosed and confined views and industrialised views within the valley. So it's important that we recognise that.
Okay, look at the next two boxes on local setting. Moderate condition. The appeal site is well managed, high grade agricultural land, whilst the ALS west of Cossington Road is pasture, etc. Although close to settlements and well used by recreational visitors, there is limited negative urbanising influences. Is that a reference to, such as neglect and litter, is that a reference to the land west of Cossington Road rather than the appeal site?
Yeah, and also the footpath alongside the appeal site, which is the main connecting strip from Sileby to the church. You know, you can't get to the public right of way without going down that footpath. So there's no litter on that footpath.
Do you mean the footway rather than the footpath?
You call it a footway next to the road, between the road on the hedge and the site. Yeah.
Okay. I know what you're talking about now. Thank you. And then the next box, low tolerance to proposed change. Local setting of the appeal site is heavily influenced by the existing built development. So just pausing there. So your professional judgment is when looking at the capacity of the site to accommodate development, that the inspector should note that the site is actually heavily influenced by existing built development. Is that fair?
Yes, correct. Yeah, around the edges. Yeah.
And then you say the development of land off Humble Lane to the south of Watercourse will further enclose the local setting of the appeal site. The urban and rural character of the Soar Valley at this location is already finely balanced, and the proposed development will be positioned on a prominent location on the valley slope.
Yep.
So I'm just trying to understand what you're saying there. So that appears to be a reference to the appeal site. So if Humble Lane comes forward, I've got more urban development, and you're saying this tips the balance in some way, and if so, from what to what?
Sorry, to say it again. The point about
it's your last sentence. It's your last sentence I didn't understand, Mr. Higson. The urban and rural character of the Soar Valley at this location is already finely balanced, and the proposed development will be positioned on a prominent location on the valley slope. And that follows on from a discussion about Humble Lane, which at the very top of the page, you've already told me, knocks down the strength of character by a notch, because it will completely change the character of the open single arable field. So what are you saying? Are you saying that there's some tipping point that's being reached here? And if so, what's it a tipping point from and to?
Yes, I think there's incremental change across the Soar Valley, with new developments being approved and allocated. And the point about the Soar Valley landscape character assessment in the guidelines, if we look at core document 6.16.
Okay. 6.16.
Page 56.
56.
Yeah. Paragraph 7.62 of the bullet points 2 and 3, they say maintain the current balance between the urban and rural character of the Soar Valley.
Yep.
And direct development away from prominent locations on the valley slopes.
Yeah, but that's for the whole landscape character area.
Yes.
That's for the whole LCA.
Yeah.
You're not saying that granted consent on this site would tip the balance for the whole LCA, are you? That would be a brave submission.
No, because I'm mentioning it in relation to the local setting of the appeal site.
Yeah.
But that character area guideline, those guidelines can apply on a local site by site basis, can't they?
Of course they can. But I understand what the current balance is within the whole of the LCA, because it tells me within the character assessment. But I don't understand what it means in terms of the locality. Are you saying that somehow you'll perceive this area as being an entirely urban one if this appeal is allowed? What's it a finely balanced position between? Are you saying there's some sort of tipping point? Was my question.
Yes, between the two settlements that are close, that have a narrow gap. Yeah.
Oh, it's a gap point again. Right. Okay. Right. I understand that now.
It must be finely balanced at this location because it's a narrow gap. I mean, if we go 2 kilometres to the northeast, it will be, the balance will be different, won't it? Because we'll have fields and we'll have settlements that are away from each other.
Yeah, but the way it's described is the urban and rural character of the Soar Valley at this location, which you set out under SH3, which is the local setting. And I sort of get it where you're talking about the local setting, but you also then talk about the Soar Valley in relation to the appeal site itself, because you use exactly the same words on page 24 in the penultimate box.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the inspector has to focus down just on the appeal site, just on the south bit of the appeal site, which is the valley bit, and then conclude that there is some unacceptable change to an urban environment as a result of the development. Is that what you're saying? Just trying to understand.
No, I'm saying the appeal site is typical of the Soar Valley in that it's a rising arable slope, prominent side slope next to the flat floodplain, and it's positioned between 2 existing settlements that are recognised as being very close to each other. So in that context, the local setting and the site itself are both finely balanced in terms of urban and rural character.
You see, I mean, I struggle with this in terms of your overall assessment. For example, and let me just give you an example of this. If you turn to SH2, table SH2, why is it said that the Soar Valley has got low to moderate scenic quality? It tells us there are no national parks or AONBs in the LCA, but there are major engineering features, and there is visible built development on well-defined rising valley slopes. Well, of that, looking at the area of the appeal site, the only thing that you can't identify is major engineering features such as a mainline railway, although there is a railway, and electricity pylons in relation to the immediate local setting of the site. And yet we leap from low moderate to good, simply because it's an undeveloped field. Seems a bit of an odd approach. Mr. Higson.
Yeah, but you can't get expansive panoramic views to Charnwood Forest from all areas of the Soar Valley. It's an extremely localised point, and it features in the northeast corner of the site.
Okay. Valued landscape.
Yeah.
Until your proof of evidence, when was it previously suggested that the appeal site was a valued landscape within the meaning of MPPF?
I'm not aware that it has been.
No other landscape architect who's looked at this, including the council's landscape officer, has concluded that it's a valued landscape, have they?
I'm not aware the landscape officer assessed it in those terms.
So is that a yes? No other landscape officer or architect has concluded it's a valued landscape?
Well, not that we know of.
Well, you're acting for the council. Have you spoken to the landscape officer?
No, not about this issue, no.
Okay.
Sorry, not about the valued landscape issue.
And it's an important issue. Sorry. And it's an important issue when advising a decision maker, as you are advising a decision maker, whether you fall within 174A or 174B. So doing their job properly is the sort of thing a landscape officer should be thinking about, isn't it? Because it has policy implications.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the silence of the landscape officer is either not competent or that they don't take the same view as you, which is the fairer inference to draw.
I don't know. I don't think you can draw an inference from that.
Really? So you don't invite the inspector to infer that the council's landscape officer was acting competently when not concluding that this was a valued landscape, despite not asking them and despite the fact there's no evidence to suggest that? You're really asking the inspector to infer incompetence?
No.
Right.
No, I'm saying I don't think you can infer it either way.
Well, of course you can. But Occam's razor tells me that I should be choosing which is the most likely. The simplest explanation is the most likely. And the simplest explanation is that the officer knew what national guidance was in relation to landscape and would have told members had they thought that it was valued landscape. Surely that's a fairer inference, isn't it?
Do you know, I'm not sure. On point.
But as is quite clear from your examination in chief, Mr. Cook's going to be characterised as an outlier in relation to concluding neutral and beneficial effect from the appeal proposals. In relation to the issue of valued landscape, you are an outlier, aren't you? Nobody else thinks that.
Well, nobody else has written either way, have they? Mr. Cook has expressly set out a neutral and beneficial effect.
Yeah. Given that this is an important issue which has policy implications, and assuming that this is an issue that you can infer silence means that it's been thought about, you are an outlier in that regard, aren't you? If I'm right about that assumption.
I think it's really difficult to say, to be honest with you. I mean, I think there have been other cases like Nampanton Road where it wasn't identified as a valued landscape, but the inspector felt that it was at the time of the appeal.
Outliers can be right. I'm not suggesting to the contrary. I'm just wanted a fairly simple proposition that until you came on the scene and wrote your proof of evidence and submitted it, nobody else had said that. And nobody else is still saying that. And you've not even checked with the officer who you're not inviting the inspector to avoid inferring incompetence. It's a slightly odd position you're taking, Mr. Higson, isn't it?
Well, there's only two of us. There's me and the officer, so it's not exactly.
And Mr. Golby and Mr. Cook.
Has Mr. Golby set out whether it's a valued landscape in the LVIA?
Mr. Golby doesn't say it's a valued landscape within the LVIA, and Mr. Golby, I'll invite the inspector to infer, was doing his job properly, as is Mr. Cook. As are you. That's why I'm slightly puzzled about the fact you can't get yourself to the point where you're going to ask the inspector to infer that the landscape officer was. But I'm going to move on rather than pursuing the point. When I look to your explanation as to why you say this is a valued landscape, mindful that puts you in a category in policy terms such as designated landscapes of national importance. So why it is that this is a valued landscape, it takes it out of the ordinary in relation to the majority of the English countryside.
Yep.
As I understand it, I'm to turn to tables 7 and 8, am I?
Yes, please.
Good. And when I want to know what it is that, not just in a local context, but in terms of looking at it for the totality of the area to which MPPF applies, i.e. England, what it is that takes this particular parcel of land and its context out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
What is it? I've got what is it that I see on page 30 of your evidence that takes it out of the ordinary?
The combination of all of them put together. So the guidance is to weigh up the different factors and see if there's an overall combination. I think that's well established.
Yeah, I know that, but I want to know what are the features that you point to that take this out of the ordinary? For example, natural heritage. It's gently sloping lowland valley side. Good example of the published character assessments. That's a large chunk of the English countryside. Cultural heritage forms part of a coherent landscape area with visible historic features. I can see the church from close to a settlement. Half of lowland Britain. Landscape condition, good productive arable land, good chunk of lowland Britain. Distinctiveness, open, high degree of visibility from the adjacent residential properties, elevated eastern slope. Well, that's a bit of topography, and I can see it from properties. And I can go all the way through this, and I've got lots and lots of interesting, but hardly out of the ordinary factors, have I?
Well, I would say they are, having visited the site and done the field work. I think you can pick up on perceptual aspects as well as providing the desk-based analysis. I don't think that the valued landscape, I don't think there's a limit on the number of valued landscapes that there can be. And I don't think there's a limit on the size or extent in which they should be.
It's a matter of judgment in every case.
Absolutely. And small pockets around England seems like a perfectly reasonable.
Well, let's see if we can break it down. Is of the factors you identify on page 30, is there any one of those that you say takes it out of the ordinary, or is it more than one?
I think the Church of All Saints, looking at it from viewpoint 7 and viewpoint 6, from the Leicestershire round, and the edge of the conservation area, and the reference in the conservation area appraisal to that part of the village as being forming part of the setting, and the fact that you could see the appeal site on the rising valley side, which is characteristic of the Soar Valley, and that contrast and combination with the flatter floodplain. That was the point of my site visit where I thought, this is a bit special.
Okay, so it's those two in combination, is it? So the view of the church and the fact that the land rises.
And the recreational use and the Leicestershire round and the connectivity between the settlement and the fact that people will come and go down to Cossington Meadows local nature reserve at the end of just by viewpoint 7. And the approach to the settlement as well, should I say.
So, and views from public rights of way and the road. So I've got 3 then. Views of the church, you can see the rising land, and views from the public rights of way and the road.
Yep.
So are any one of those factors which takes it out of the ordinary, or is it the combination of the 3 of them?
It's a combination of the 3, and also I do mention the gap as well, and the approach to the settlement, which is part of the distinctiveness factor in the TGN.
Okay, so I've got gap, view of church, I can see rising land, views of the public right of way and the road. Is it a combination of the 4 of them, or is any one of those sufficient to take it out of the ordinary into the realms of valued landscape?
Combination
of all 4, but not individual.
Best and most versatile land. Well, I mean, the guidance does say it's possible that one factor alone can result in a valued landscape judgment. So you could just pick on the church and say that is exceptional, but to me it was the blend really at this location. So
you just mentioned best and rest assured. I'm going to be characterising this as probably the worst case of valued landscape claiming in any case I've dealt with for an awfully long period of time. But that's a matter for submission, not for questions. But I want to make sure I've characterised your case first, correctly first. You mentioned best and most versatile land partway through that.
Yes.
So you think the issue of B&M, best and most versatile land, is a relevant factor when assessing valued landscape in this case, do you?
Yes.
In this case?
Yeah.
So that area of grade 2, which runs through the middle, is perceptible how?
It's good health. Good health elements such as good water quality, good soil health, which is a landscape condition. It's an example of an indicator of landscape value in the technical guidance note, which is core document 6.28.
Okay.
Page 8 of that.
And do I need all 5 of these to? So the best and most versatile, the views of public rights of way of this particular field, rising land, view of a church from a parcel of land close to an existing settlement, and the gap point. Do I need all 5 of them to comprise valued landscape, or is a combination of fewer sufficient?
The guidance says either. You can have one, apparently.
No, I want your professional judgment, not what the guidance says.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, for this site, it's the combination.
It's the combination of all 5. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it 5 or 6 or 7?
I don't.
You know,
it's your judgment, Mr. Higson. I'm just trying to understand it. So I asked you initially. You said view of the church first, then you said and the rising land. Then you paused, and then you said, and its views from the public rights of way and the roadside. Then we had another pause, and then you added the gap. Then we had another pause, during which you gave a long answer, in the middle of which you mentioned best and most versatile land. I don't mind what your case is, Mr. Higson. I really don't. I just want to know what it is. Is it a combination of all those 5? Is there another one I need to add to that list?
Yeah, well, I mean, I clearly set it out in the paragraph. 3.2.14, which summarises the individual factors in table SH8 and SH7.
OK, well, let's try this way. There have been a number of appeals kicking around in relation to this part of the world. As a sense check, is there a parcel of land nearby that has been concluded to be valued landscape that you'd like the inspector to go and look at, which has comparable value to this one? Just as a sense check, as a yardstick. Go and have a look at the site at ... That's been found to be valued landscape. Compare the two. You'll see why this is special.
Yeah, well, Nanpanton Road would be a good one.
Nanpanton Road. Excellent. Yeah, I think it really would, actually. Good. Well, we can add that to the site visit for next week. Thank you for that. And then finally, Mr. Cook's rebuttal proof of evidence sets out a number of previous appeal decisions and decisions for sites within areas of local separation.
OK.
I am not going to take you through each and every one of those decisions. You'll be pleased to hear, because every case turns on its individual merits. But in terms of the proposition that he draws from that, namely that being within an area of local separation is not of itself a bar to development, do you agree with that proposition?
Yes.
Depends upon the circumstances of the case.
Sure.
Mr. Higson, you've been very patient with me. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you, sir. I'll just double check the WhatsApp to make sure I've not missed something. No, it's an offer to send you, sir, a plan of the Nanpanton Road is the only thing I've had through. So that's helpful, sir. I think that's part of your unaccompanied bit.
Fine. Yeah, we can talk about that in a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Are there any other questions for Mr. Higson from anyone? Obviously, there have to be questions from people opposing the council. But I'm not aware of any of those. I just have one point of clarification, Mr. Higson. Councillor Jones, I'm afraid you can't ask a question of Mr. Higson because he's speaking in favour of the council. So I would be very wary about inviting you here.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify some things that have come up that might be helpful. No?
I'm afraid no. I'm afraid not, Councillor Jones. I mean, there'll be opportunity to ask questions of the appellant's landscape witness on the 4th of April. I'm afraid.
Yeah. On the 4th of April.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. The only point of clarification I had for you, Mr. Hickson, was your references to the listed building and the listed church in the conservation area. I assume that they're done in landscape and visual terms. You've raised them, identified them for that reason, not for any other reason in heritage terms.
Yeah, no. So the technical guidance notes on assessing landscape value, that sets out a range of factors to consider. And the second one is cultural heritage. And the examples of indicators of landscape value which are listed include presence of historic landmark structures or design landscape elements, landscape which contributes to the significance of heritage assets, for example, forming the setting of heritage assets, especially if identified in special studies, and then landscapes which offers a dimension of time depth. And so it was the time depth, really. I'm not commenting on, the heritage setting,
significant or setting, those sorts of matters. No.
It's visual. Appreciation of landscape with time and depth.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Just to clarify. Thank you, Mr. Hickson. So then, Mr. Richards, do you have questions for Mr. Hickson in re-examination?
I do, sir, but not many.
Okay, well, if you're happy to proceed, then please do.
Yes, Mr. Hickson, can we just pick up the technical guidance note that you've just been referring to, because it was the topic of the inspector's question and Mr. Tucker's last question, or it featured in the answer. And I think it says CD 6.28.
Yep.
And I think you directed Mr. Tucker to page 8. Is that page 8 internally page 8 or page 8 PDF page 8?
Yeah, PDF page 12, page 8 stamped on the document.
Okay.
And that's partway through the table of factors, but it's quite helpful. It lists each factor, and then the third column is the examples.
Yes, but if we go to the text just above the start of the table, paragraph 2.43. Noted that the factors are not presented in order of importance.
Yeah.
As with box 5 in Glivia 3, table 1 not intended to be an exhaustive list of factors to be considered when determining the value of landscape, but provide a range of factors and indicators that could be considered.
Yeah.
And this TGN is intended to be complementary to Glivia 3. Why did somebody think it was a good idea to produce this technical guide note to expand on Glivia 3? Do you know?
Well, Glivia 3 was 2013. I think the MPPF came out about the same time. So I think there's been, lots of discussion at, with planning authorities and appeals and things to try and clarify. And there's been, within the appendix for this document, there's a review of, the background in terms of designation, but also sort of decisions and case law. But it's been put together by the Landscape Institute, experienced co-authors and working group.
Okay, so it's supposed to be of assistance when addressing the matter that's between you and Mr. Cook.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, good, all right. And just find for the inspector, would you, the actual reference to or the actual bit that you rely on for including best and most versatile in that, in your consideration?
Yeah. So it is landscape condition. which is page 8.
Yeah.
And yeah, third column. So good physical condition, intact individual landscape elements, good health elements such as good water quality and good soil health.
All right, good. Okay, so that was the first issue I wanted to ask you about. The second issue, working backwards, I think we'll do it, is, do you remember you were asked to look at the emerging Cossington neighbourhood development plan?
Yeah.
Which is at, I'm just going to close my door. The house has been invaded by teenage girls for the weekend and I can hear them arriving. Thank you.
Hopefully you know them, Mr. Richards.
Well, they're friends of my daughter's come to stay for the weekend. I'm just going to be the taxi driver. So yes, so Cossington emerging neighbourhood plan, and it was the figure 17 on page 50. And Mr. Tucker had identified that it would appear that the Cossington neighbourhood plan is going to try and include a piece of land to the north of what we know as the Humble Lane site,
yep.
The northern part of the Humble Lane site, within the area of local separation.
Yeah.
Can you look at core document 7.05, please?
Yeah.
Which should be the Humble Lane illustrative master plan.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of tie-up between what's shown on that master plan and what the Cossington Parish Council might be up to?
It's the northern part of the site area.
Yeah, I mean, it may not be all of it, but
yeah, it kind of extends over the northern part. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not all of it because the Humble Lane comes all the way down.
Yeah.
To the south, doesn't it?
Okay. All right. Now then, next, please. I want to look at the ARUP report of 2016, which is either core document 7 or 6, but I can't remember, 07 or 06, but it's the one you were looking at with Mr.
Yeah. 06.
Tucker.
Yeah.
And it was the page 71, the recommendation to extend the boundary to the west.
Yeah.
Hang on, I'm now in the wrong document. Now, you'll recall that Mr. Tucker asked you some questions about ribbon development. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And he put to you, and I think you agreed, that ribbon development was of a single plot depth.
Mm.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
If the focus of this area of local separation, if the primary focus of this area of local separation is to inhibit ribbon development, can you think of a reason why it might be thought desirable to extend the area of local separation to the west?
No, not really. But I was struck, other than it's a sort of a coherent unit and the landscape of the fields, read as one.
Yeah. And if the primary focus of this area of local separation was to prevent ribbon development, Can you think of a reason why the area of local separation already extends over to the east, away from the road along which there has been ribbon development?
No.
Right. And if the aim of this area of local separation is to, in effect, make sure that the current shortest distance of separation between the two settlements, 150 metres, is not further reduced, can you think of a reason why the area of local separation isn't just proposed to be a 150-metre strip across the whole piece, but instead extends further north and south of that notional 150-metre strip?
Yeah. Yeah, he must be seeking to capture a broader area of ground and prevent broad developments.
Yeah, okay. Now then, I think there is only one other matter that I want to talk to you about. Yes, and it goes back to right at the start of the cross-examination this morning. You'll recall that Mr. Tucker took you to your LVIA, your proof or appendix 1.
Yep.
And took you to the definition of the local area that both you and the Mr. Golby in the LVIA had adopted. So you both considered the national character area, the local borough character area, the appeal site itself, and then an area of land in between the appeal site itself and the borough character area as a sort of intermediate stepping stone.
Yes.
And that, I'm just scrolling down now to try and find it, that you defined in your appendix 1. Can you help me with where? I think it was a 3-point something. Yes. 3.2.2 on page 21.
Yeah. Yeah.
The local setting of the appeal site.
Yeah. So the land associated with the wider AOLS, land to the immediate south, the local watercourse, and to the east of the railway line. Yeah.
It's the area of land to the immediate south of the local watercourse I want to ask you about. First of all, we need to identify the local watercourse that you're talking about, and Mr. Golby are talking about. It may help you to look at the illustrative master plan at CD 2.06, which also has an air photograph on it.
Yeah. Yeah, so the watercourse, the Costington Brook, I think was named earlier this week, sort of extends down that southern side boundary and then through the Derry's Nursery site and then continues west of the road.
Yes, and it follows the naturally enough the line of the wiggly hedge west of the road, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it cuts through, as you say, the Derry's Nursery site, and it eventually ends up in about the bottom right-hand corner, the southeastern corner of the appeal site.
Yeah.
Thing. So what's the land? The reference is not to the land south of it, but the land immediately south of it. What are you and Mr. Golby meaning by that?
Well, I'm starting to doubt myself whether I'm meaning the same thing as Mr. Golby now having this discussion this morning, because neither of us have drawn it on a plan.
No.
I mean, realistically, it's a single field, isn't it? So in that southeast corner. So I suppose I don't know whether it extends right the way across it or whether it's immediately sounds, it's just south of it.
Well, if we go to Mr. Golby's LVIA.
Yeah.
His words that he uses, I think the inspector's already seen, but for his note at paragraph 4.24 on page 22.
Yeah.
But then if you go to PDF paragraph 33, internal paragraph PDF page 33, internal paragraph at page 31, you should find a table within the left-hand column, those same words written again.
Yeah.
Local setting of the site, including the site, the land associated with the wider LOS, land to the immediate south of the local watercourse, etc. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And then in the next column,
yeah,
we have written the land associated with the site, Derry's nurseries to the south, the pastoral setting to the west, and the wider arable setting to the south and east is varied, possessing a moderate strength of character, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So the Derry's nurseries site is within the that area of local
south of the watercourse, isn't it?
Yeah. And we know that the watercourse runs through the middle of roughly the middle of Derry's site, Derry's land. So what does that help you with a view as to what might be the land immediately to the south of the watercourse that's being referred to?
Yeah, well, I think it's that corridor along the watercourse, really. I think the local setting is that immediate.
Okay.
Immediate area.
And just casting your mind back to the Humble Lane illustrative master plan. What sort of land use is proposed in that area on the Humble Lane illustrative master plan?
Yeah, green. That's their green infrastructure area. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Hickson. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Richards, and thank you, Mr. Hickson, for your contributions today.
Okay.
Thank you. So that brings to a close then the council's landscape witness and evidence, and also brings today's proceedings to an end. But before we obviously adjourn, obviously it would be good to discuss some procedural points and also site visit arrangements. So in terms of the site visit arrangements, I think the intention is to meet at 10 o'clock and to obviously have a walk around the site and the surrounding area in terms of viewpoints. Haven't been given a specific itinerary. I mean, we have all the various viewpoints. I don't know if there's a particular walking route or starting point that's been identified. I'm fairly flexible. When I went and saw it last week, I started in the car park at the church in Costington, but I'm open to suggestions of an alternative place. And if people don't know immediately, that can be done by, you can let me know on Monday if it's not an immediate sort of decision on that one.
Yes, I'm going to be in Mr. Higson's hands really on that, sir. Mr. Hickson, do you want to put your camera back on and help us out as to where you think the best place to meet for the site visit is?
So just whilst Mr. Hickson is coming on for that, You'll of course recall that there is a document entitled Viewpoint Locators and Inspector Itinerary that's been produced within Mr. Cook's appendices.
Yes, that's just a map, isn't it? I think
it's just a map with all the viewpoints overlain on it, so it doesn't provide much more detail than that. But I think that's probably the best that we had so far.
That's fine. I mean, it is, yes, I certainly have that and all the viewpoints. I think there's no obvious sort of starting point or route. But as I say, I'm open to suggestions if Mr. Hickson has an idea or anybody else.
Yeah, the car parking area by the church is a good one. If we're all arriving in different vehicles, then if there's 4 of us, we can park up there and capture most of the viewpoints within walking distance. I think number 12 is perhaps a bit of a drive up. 11 we could walk to. That's on the round, but we can maybe discuss that once we're there. But I would think as a base, I'd go for the church car park.
I mean, the question is whether or not I need to. I certainly will go to any viewpoint shown, but whether or not we all have to walk to or drive to every single viewpoint is perhaps a point for discussion. But yeah, I'm happy to meet in the car park if that makes sense to others. Councillor Jones, you have your hand raised.
Yes, for your viewpoint on the Leicestershire Round. Can I suggest that you stand going towards Humble Lane and you stand on the railway bridge? That gives you a very good view of the whole site. Yes. And it also is on the Leicestershire Round, and it's the one that's mentioned as looking over the Soar Valley.
Yeah, so I think it's viewpoint 9 that we've been sort of looking at. So I'd certainly go for that.
Viewpoint.
Yeah, I'll certainly make sure that we go there. And Councillor Astill.
Hi, I wonder if you'd be able to take the opportunity to have a look on Barrow Road. Mention's been made of the other area of local separation to the north of Sileby. I think it'd probably be quite interesting to look at the very different landscape character there and how that works in comparison to the Cossington Road site.
Okay.
And also, if you'd have the opportunity, be extremely grateful if you'd have a look at the car park provision in Sileby, both at the Memorial Car Park and at the car park adjacent to the train station, which no doubt you'll probably see on your trip. And
yes.
It'd be extremely helpful if you would be able to coincide that with the school turfing out time.
Yes, that point. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Councillor Astill. Yes, certainly. I made a note to try and see the school turfing out time. Is that sort of 3 o'clock onwards? That really
about 3:15 really for that half an hour. There are some very nice cafes in Sileby as well. So if you get there's the main Cafe 19 or the brewery.
Thank you for those recommendations. Thank you. Okay, I mean certainly happy to do that, and certainly happy to look at the Barrow Road. At the side of the village. Again, I can do that on my own if the parties are happy for me to go and look at that. And it's also reference to going to look at the Nampantan Road site as well. So I think as long as I kind of know where I'm going for that, then
sorry about that, sir.
That's okay. Then I'm sure. Well, if I can be pointed in the right direction on the day for that site, I think that would probably be fine. So I think then, unless anyone tells me differently before Tuesday, we meet at the car park at the church in Costington at 10 o'clock, and we'll take it from there. And then I think once I've finished walking around with the parties, I'll do the any of the wider locations, do the train journey to and from Costington, and obviously be there for the afternoon school leaving time and up to 4 o'clock-ish, I would imagine. So that's all. So in terms of who's going to be there, Mr. Hickson, you'll be there from the council. Anybody else from the council coming to the visit?
I think Mr. Gould's coming as well.
Mr. Gould, was that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then Mr. Tucker, any obviously at this stage, do we know if Mr. Cook will be there or not? I suppose it's not clear yet.
It's not clear, but he absolutely won't be there if he's got any symptoms at all.
Yes.
So my anticipation at the moment would be it would be Mr. White, who is the representative of the appellant. It would be Caroline Rowe, R-O-E, who is Mr. Cook's assistant.
Right.
And I think also Ms. Smedley is intending to be there as well.
Okay.
If that changes, sir, we'll notify the case officer the day before.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, certainly, yeah, as long as I know that I've got at least one representative from each side, that's the key thing.
Yes.
Thank you. And I don't know if any interested parties want to come on any part of the site visit or not, whether Councillor Jones or Councillor Hastill or anybody else. You're welcome to, but equally, I'm not requiring it.
Okay.
But I think we'll you know where we're meeting at 10, and I suppose what I should say is presumably we'll go into the site as part of the visit. Certainly, is that the intention from to go into the site itself to
I'm happy to have a walk around the boundaries. You know, you can get up and round as long as we've got access from the landowner.
Yeah.
The answer is, sir, yes, you emphatically should go onto the site itself.
Fine. So presumably sensible footwear, certainly for that part of the, and probably for the footpaths as well, I would imagine. So fine, that's okay. Anything else on the site visit? Anyone? No. Okay. Thank you. Well, if there's anything else or any changes, then obviously do let me know before Tuesday. And then just in terms of outstanding points or documents before we adjourn. So Mr. Higson has a couple of things to provide on the local setting and distances in providing that on a map basis. I would assume sort of early part of next week would be helpful. I mean, certainly if Mr. Higson's able to provide that before the site visit, that might be useful. If that's possible, Mr. Higson.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. So for Monday then, that'd be great. And then I think we're waiting on the note on the outdoor sports projects and an update on that. I think that was by early next week. And then I don't know where things have got to with the Highgate school data part of things. I know Mr. Hunter was going to provide a note by early next week. But I don't know if Mr. Tucker, if you know whether he's had sight of the data and whether he's working on a note at the moment.
The answer is, sir, I don't know if he's received it. Others in my team might.
I mean, if it's being delayed, then it's not critical for early next week. I think we just had a deadline for something to aim for.
Well, we'd certainly been told it was going to be provided overnight, you'll recall, sir.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll chase that because we should have received that by now if we haven't. So we'll notify the case officer that there'll be a delay.
Okay.
Apparently we've not had anything from the county yet, sir. So we will send a chaser.
Okay, thank you. Well, update me next week if there's anything I need to know. But hopefully I'll hear next week from the appellant on the data. Thank you. And I think the only thing that was outstanding is the 106, but I think we said that we're happy to wait for that until the final week of sitting. So I think we can probably have an update on the 4th of April if needed as to where that's got to. But I'm not expecting that straight away. So then the plan is then obviously site visit on Tuesday, and then we'll have the next inquiry sitting day on the Monday, the 4th of April. Starting at 9:30, if everyone's happy with that sort of time. Obviously, if Mr. Cook is unable to attend, or then we'll have to sort of think about how we deal with that. I suppose one option is we possibly hear from the council's planning witness on the 4th of April, perhaps, and then leave Mr. Cook until the following week, until we go on a party by party basis rather than topic by topic.
Yes, well, we'll certainly stand by for that as Plan B on the 4th of April, and if Mr. Tucker can give us an update, if not on the Friday afternoon before, but over the weekend, then that would be great. Or
absolutely.
That's on the appellant's team.
Absolutely, Mr. Richards. We'll make sure that's done.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, obviously, hopefully Mr. Cook has been able to at least hear some of today, and obviously we'll be able to catch up on the YouTube for anything else. But yes, if 4th of April is not doable, then we do have a plan B at least.
Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you. Anything else from anyone? Anything else from the appellant, Mr. Tucker?
No, sir. I save again to thank you for your forbearance in terms of coping with my illness-prone team at the moment, sir.
That's okay. Well, at least we've been able to make some progress with the inquiry this week, so that's good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And Mr. Richards, anything else from the council?
I don't think from me, no, and nothing from my WhatsApp, so I don't think so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And anything from anybody else? No. Okay. Well, obviously, I'll see those of you who are coming on site on Tuesday, and everybody else I'll see on the 4th of April at 9:30. Thank you. We'll adjourn until then. Goodbye.
Thank you, sir.